Where's inflation? Everybody said that tariffs would directly cause inflation because they increase the cost to produce goods, which thus is going to be passed on to the consumer. Yet, when you look at the most recent CPI inflation report, it's actually at 2.3%. This is the lowest level we've seen since like 2021. So then, where is the inflation? In fact, I've also heard a pretty good theory explaining why we're not experiencing inflation, and that has to do with purchasing power. And it sounds good on the surface that because tariffs do not change purchasing power or monetary supply, then you can't really have true inflation because a higher cost on good A will be countered with less demand on good B. And less demand on good B will make those sellers lower their prices to continue selling. It sounds really good on the surface, and in fact, in economic theory, it might even hold true. The problem is that tariff inflation is cost push inflation. It means that prices must rise, regardless of demand, because the costs to produce, in this case, the cost to sell those goods inside the United States, increases. Not only that, but the current tariffs are, in a sense, blanket tariffs on all imported goods. We have a blanket 10% tariff across the board. We also have a 30% tariff on China, which we import tons of essential goods from, which means that this tariff inflation would hit the economy across the board, not just particular industries where consumers might counter that by buying less of something else, which thus decreases the price, which thus has a net neutral effect on inflation. So, with that said then, where is the inflation? And why is the current CPI inflation report so low if tariffs are officially in effect? Well, that's what we're going to talk about here today because tariff inflation is still on its way. As always, my name is Derek. I got my degree in finance, so you don't have to. Let's dive right in. Okay, so it's a valid question because right now CPI seems good and the prices of things, while they are very expensive, have not seen a massive increase on certain imported goods. So then where is this inflation? Well, there's a couple of reasons for this. One, why it hasn't hit us yet. And two, even when it does show up, why the effects might be blunted on the surface. But this is only a facade. In real life, you are still paying higher prices. So let's talk about this. First and foremost, we have to talk about supply buildup. When Trump announced these tariffs, companies scrambled to get supply into the United States ahead of these tariffs. A famous example now is Apple, which flew over 1 million iPhones into the country on just like a private airplane to try to avoid these tariffs. Now, this, of course, was a famous example, but this is happening in many industries with many companies. Companies are unsure how much the tariffs are going to be, when they're going to be implemented, if they're actually going to go into effect after that 90-day pause or not. So they've rushed inventory into the country. This is less expensive, cheaper inventory. So companies have the leeway to continue pricing things at the same price as they've been. This inventory is set to run out, though, from anywhere over the next month to 3 months. As this inventory dwindles and it is replaced with higher cost inventory, you and I, the consumer, will likely see price increases. Now, here's the thing. These price increases are going to hit us across the board, even in domestically produced things. Why? Okay, well, the best way to describe this is if I am a major retailer and I sell 2 products and one product got twice as expensive, so now it went from $100 to $200, and the other product, which I sell many more of because it's much cheaper, let's say it's a can of peanut butter, that costs $10, okay? What is more jarring to my customers? To increase product A by double, now selling at $200, or instead to increase product A by, say, 10%, now it's costing $110, and then the other product, which I sell significantly more of, I might increase it from $10 to $12 or $10 to $15. So basically what retailers are likely to do is spread the tariff inflation cost across the board. Now, of course, these products aren't going to be one for one, but what you're going to see, especially when it comes to the major retailers like Walmart, like like Target, like Amazon, companies that have access to high-end computing and artificial intelligence that can run the calculations and best figure out how to distribute costs, you're going to most likely see a lower percentage cost increase, but on pretty much all goods, because they're going to distribute the cost instead of just hammer down significant things that are being imported from China and now are costing 30% more. So that's the first thing. The next thing that we have to talk about is the change in tariff policies. When all these economists and all these financial professionals were screaming that this is going to cause inflation, it was under the assumption that Trump was going to put 100+% tariffs on China, as well as massive, anywhere from 20 to 50% tariffs on many other countries. That did not happen. Both the reciprocal tariffs, which weren't actually reciprocal, as well as the tariffs on China have all been paused. This follows suit when it comes to the tariffs on Canada and Mexico. Remember, that is where the tariffs started. 25% on Canada, 25% on Mexico. Those were swiftly and quickly paused. Why? Well, in my opinion, really it comes down to investors, primarily the bond market. Okay, the most recent round of tariffs were greatly reduced, not the China tariffs, but the reciprocal tariffs were greatly reduced because the bond market told Trump they don't like this. Okay, the bond market basically crashed, which sent the yields on those bonds skyrocketing. This makes government debt much more expensive to service and add more of. And of course, right now the government is running a huge deficit, so it needs to fund this through borrowing. Trump, his advisors, the United States government is well aware of this, and the bond market basically forced Trump's hand to pause these tariffs because this could have absolutely caused a financial catastrophe. Now let's talk about China. Well, the China tariffs were massive. They were above 100%. And I think not only internal pressure, but a realization that this tariff war or this trade war could lead to a massive contraction of the US economy also made Trump rethink this. Now, was this the original plan? I don't know. I can't read Trump's mind. The point of the matter is that these massive tariffs were reduced. Do I still think that we're going to experience tariff inflation in the coming months? Yes, I absolutely do. Because any sort of tariff increase or any sort of cost increase due to tariffs is absolutely going to be passed on to the consumer. And here is my major concern. It can be 10% across the board for everybody. It can be 30% for China, because remember, it's 10% plus a 20% added tariff for basically meant to fight fentanyl. That tariff is going to increase the costs of producing or importing goods. That is going to be passed on to the consumer. Is it going to be 30%? Maybe, maybe not. My major concern, and we've seen this many, many times before, most recently when prices were increased due to inflation during the 2020 financial crisis and over the last couple of years. Companies are not very good, or really what I should say is they don't want to. They don't want to lower prices after any cost push inflation on their end has been reduced. Okay. My major concern is that even if these tariffs are canceled at some point, whether it be by Trump or whether it be by future presidents, I have a major concern, and I think I think you and I can both agree that this is virtually guaranteed, that companies will not be quick to cut their their prices back down to the normal levels. Why? Well, because why would they? People are already accustomed to paying the higher prices. In fact, some salaries may have even increased because people needed more money or demanded more money to pay for these higher costs. So now that we're operating at a higher level, why would companies then, because the costs have been eliminated, why would they reduce the prices down to the normal price? And then you go and you say, well, supply and demand should dictate that they must, because when there's enough competition, other companies are going to undercut them in order to sell for a lower price, and then that's going to force everybody to bring their prices back down. That, in theory, also sounds really good, and I would even agree with that. The problem is, You know what Trump's theory is? Data. And the data says otherwise. Okay, the data says that that is not what happens. In fact, what happens is prices remain relatively elevated even after the inflationary pressure is eliminated. Now, are these companies talking with each other in a sort of, monopolistic way to keep prices higher, or a price gouging way? No, I don't think so. I just think they all make a calculation in their heads and they don't lower prices. And on top of that, we've always had cheaper options of pretty much everything. You can buy off-brand, right? You can buy generic. That doesn't stop the more expensive items from remaining more expensive. That's because supply and demand is not in a vacuum. There are other things that influence this, like brand loyalty, brand power. We live in a consumer society where brands matter and people almost uphold their status based on the brands that they buy. Now, is this a good way of thinking? Probably not, but it is the case. So my main concern is not so much if tariff inflation is coming. Unless tariffs are completely set back to the levels that they were before, we're going to see some form of tariff inflation. I don't even really think this is up for debate at this point. It is just a simple, logical path. My main concern, though, and more so my primary concern, is that this tariff inflation will never go away. Just like the inflation from the 2020 financial crisis and beyond, even when those inflationary pressures were reduced, supply chains were fixed, we're all left with higher prices. So, is tariff inflation on its way? Yes, unless tariffs are canceled completely. Do I think it'll show up this year in 2025? Yes, absolutely. Will you or I notice it? Maybe not, because major companies especially are going to spread that cost across the board, and everything might just go up a few cents or $1 or $2 where you don't really notice it, but on your monthly end budget, you probably will. I hope this video was informative and enlightening. If you like personal finance, world economics, and investing broken down as simply as they can be, then you are in the right place. So I hope to see you in the next video. With that said, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.